Hello, this is Joe from Nerd in Korea. We are doing continuing our MTG 101 series. We're talking about the zones this time. This is very important to understand to play the game. So my primary source for this is mtgfandom.com, and I will include a link in the description if you want to check that out to maybe have it explained in a different way or be able to track down some more information. So there are 7 main zones, okay? There's a history of other zones with older cards. They don't really do that anymore, so yeah. Anyway, the 7 main zones are Library, Hand, Command, Graveyard, Exile, Battlefield, and Stack, okay? So these, a lot of people probably don't think of all of these as zones, especially the Stack. You don't think it's kind of something that just disappears automatically, so it's part of how the game works, so it's weird to think of it as a zone, I think. First up, we're going to talk about one distinction that we need to understand for zones, and that's if it's a shared or public. Shared, public, and ordered. I guess 3 distinctions, yeah. Shared and public, I think, are the most important ones. Alright. So a shared zone means all players have equal ability to affect that zone. It is not controlled by a single player, and each player does not have their own version of that zone. So let's say, for instance, your graveyard. You have your graveyard. Any effect, if it says exile a graveyard, that doesn't apply to everyone's, right? It's not a shared zone, it's just yours. Whereas the battlefield is a shared zone, right? People can affect anything on the battlefield. They needed some kind of special effect to affect your graveyard at all, and if they hit your graveyard, it doesn't mean everyone's graveyard. If it says exile all graveyards, it does. Exile your graveyard only hits yours. Anyway. Yeah. Ordered zones. Alright, so this can be very important too. So in some zones, order is very important. In cards released before 1999, the graveyard required to be ordered, but not generally anymore. So the graveyard is a weird one where at one point the order of the cards was very important, and now not so much. It's actually kind of just like, it'd be really annoying because yeah, they can actually, you don't want to have to deal with ordering your graveyard on top of everything else. Alright, so the stack is probably the most important place where ordering makes a major difference, right? The stack, basically, when you cast a spell, it goes on the stack, and every other spell that comes after it comes on the stack, and then they go from top to bottom. So the most recent one gets cast first and the oldest one last. This makes a huge difference in play, right? What resolves, what happens, changes completely based on what order you do things in. So yeah, the stack is basically resolved in in reverse order, essentially, right? Whatever's cast first goes last, and whatever's last goes first. So yeah, that is kind of the most confusing part, I think. Okay, so here we're going to talk about all the battlefield and all the zones on the battlefield. So once again, this right here is considered the battlefield, and there's also, we've got the command zone here, and the library, and then yeah, the graveyard, right? So one thing to point out here, and I did mention this, or I'm going to mention this, I should say, is that lands are here. On a lot of playmats, it says that lands are separate from the battlefield. They're not. The lands are on the battlefield. All of this is the battlefield here, okay? All of this is the battlefield. Once again, this is the command zone, where your commander goes. This is the library, where you draw cards from, and then here is the graveyard. If something of yours gets destroyed, it goes to the graveyard, right? And this applies to just about everything. The board. Alright, first of all, you have your library. The library is ordered and what you're supposed to draw from, right? When you're drawing cards, you're drawing from your library. If you are supposed to draw a card and your library is empty, you lose the game. So that is one lose condition. It's called milling, where they take your library and just force you to put it into your graveyard. And then if you're supposed to draw a card and you can't, you're out. Game over. That's one of the lost conditions. Graveyard. Okay. If your opponents are killed or destroyed in any way, they will go to the graveyard. I'm not supposed to use the K word on YouTube. I forgot. There are many ways to get things back out of the graveyard. Every time I'm making a video, I start having stomach issues. Anyway. Yeah, black especially is very good at getting things back out of the graveyard. That's kind of a very black trick or black mana color to get things out of the graveyard. Alright. Some effects say the card is exiled. Those cards go into exile. That is a different zone. Basically, it's sending it to a different zone, not to your graveyard if it's exiled. Which is much more difficult to return cards from if they're sent there. There are not a whole lot of things where you can get things back out of exile. There are abilities that let you put it in exile and recast it, or go to exile and cast immediately. If you are sending something to exile, it's usually just out of the game. It's done. Graveyard, there are all kind of shenanigans. Exile, not a whole lot to do. Tokens can be confusing. Alright, this is actually something they had to update the rules about. So they do enter the graveyard. Okay, so a token is like a temporary creature or artifact or something like that, or even enchantment, right? But it's only basically, it's not a real card. As soon as it enters the graveyard, it just ceases to exist. So it does enter the graveyard. That's very important for a lot of effects that will say, like, if a creature dies or if a creature enters the graveyard, maybe each opponent loses 1 life. That does happen because it does go to the graveyard, but once it's in the graveyard, just gone, right? It just disappears. So yeah. Okay, the battlefield. Permanents such as lands, creatures, artifacts, and enchantments go into this zone. This is a shared zone. This is actually where most of the game happens, is on the battlefield, right? All the attacking, playing creatures, playing artifacts, all of that is going to be represented on the battlefield. So this is kind of the most important zone. I think the most game-heavy zone, maybe the stack and this. Between those two, that's like probably 97% of the game. Okay? Some playmats list the lands area as a separate zone. It is not, right? So there's an area that says lands on a lot of playmats, and that's just a suggestion, really, of where to put lands, so it's clear to everyone what you have. That is very important. On the battlefield, every player should be able to see and know what is on the battlefield. You can't, like, hide things and then be like, oh, I have this thing I hid. This can be definitely a sticking point for some people. And I get that. I think it is reasonable. Like, especially if you've got your land all mixed around and kind of like, oh, actually I have 1 more. Oh, I have 1 more. It's very frustrating because, like, everyone else is making decisions based on what they think you are, what resources you have available. So it's very important to make it clear what you have and what you don't have. Finally, the command zone. The command zone is the command zone is unique to the commander format. This is where your commander or general of your deck goes. So in commander, you've got 1 card that's kind of like the boss of the whole deck, or the captain, or general, sure. Anyway, you can cast that one at any time, and if it dies or is exiled, anytime it changes zones, you can send it back to the command zone. And then if you play it again, you have to pay 2 extra. Every time it's 2 more. So if you casted it twice, 2 more, 3 times, 4 more, 5 times, or sorry, 3 times, 6 extra. So it gets very expensive very quickly. That's why killing someone's commander, or I use the K word again, destroying someone's commander is very effective. Anyway, the player always has access to that zone, so that's one thing that's very nice about the commander. It's basically an extra card in your hand, right? Because you can always play it. Everyone knows what it is because it is open information, but yeah, still very good to have. Yeah. Again, anytime a commander changes zones, you can return it to the command zone. This is a very important distinction when it changes zones, right? So if someone exiles your commander, or even if you put your commander into exile, and it's supposed to come back, but for some reason it can't, it's out. It's just out of the game. You can't be like, oh, okay, now I'm going to take it back. No, too late. If it's in exile and gets stuck there, it's just in exile. That's it. Off the board. So these 3 zones are not on the board. So this is one aspect I think that for newer players is very confusing, because like you've got these zones that don't really exist on the board. Most games do not have that kind of thing. Okay, your hand, that's very simple, right? Very common thing. Cards you have to cast or play before they enter the stack. So basically, when you draw cards, you put them into your hand, and that's what you can cast. Hey, easy. Exile. Okay, this is commonly kept separately by each player, although it is considered a shared zone. So exile is usually put under the graveyard sideways. This is what it is a lot of times. But it is actually a shared zone, and also anything in the command or in exile is you're supposed to have face up so everyone can see it. You can't, like, some things specify face down, then it's hidden. Otherwise, everyone knows what's in exile. If you exile something, everyone can see it. The stack. This is where all cast spells and used abilities go before they are resolved. There are a few like kind of niche exceptions to that. We're going to talk about one of the major ones, but yeah. In general, if an ability is used, it enters the stack. If a spell is cast, it enters the stack. So it can be kind of tricky to keep track of everything because abilities do not have cards, right? The stack for a card, you can actually put the card down, and then yeah, if you play an ability though, that's just activated by like tapping or trigger or whatever it may be. So that's just something you have to remember. A little bit more tricky. Anyway. Again, off the board, first of all, your hand. So when you draw a card from your library, it will enter your hand. Some effects may cause you to discard your cards from your hand. Forcing opponents to discard can limit the options they have during their turn. So that is very effective, right? If you take away all of the cards in someone's hand, or even just reduce it to a very small number, they can't do a lot on their turn if they don't have spells. They need the cards to cast things, of course. Some effects such as Madness can allow you to play a discarded card, possibly for cheaper than the mana cost or a bonus effect. This discard thing, they have kind of built that into the game more, with things like Madness that allow you to just like basically cast it anyway, right? If you have to discard it, great. Usually you can cast it for cheaper even. So there's a lot of cards that want to be discarded even, I would say. Alright, Exile. So sending your opponent's card to exile is considered a more effective than just destroying it, or sending it to the graveyard, right? Anything that says destroy, I'm going to avoid using the K word. That says destroy, it goes to the graveyard. Right? That is not too hard to get things back out of. I think most, maybe not most, but many decks are very good at like just taking things and throwing them back on the battlefield. Green and black are both have a lot of tools that will let you do that. Anyway. As I said, exile is open information, meaning anyone can see cards in exile unless the card specifies that it goes into exile face down, right? It has to say face down in exile. Otherwise, it's just everyone gets to see it, everyone knows what's happening. Some effects such as Foretell and Plot allow you to send a card into exile to be played later. So some cards, yeah. Once again, this can be very effective. Such as Foretell and Plot, you can basically pay a cost and put the card into exile, and then Foretell is usually reduced cost, and then Plot is usually for free after. You can cast it later for free. Again, what is important maybe to remember here is that it's not being cast until you're actually putting it onto the battlefield. Just using foretell and paying the foretell cost or plot and the plot cost, that's an ability. So if someone wants to counter that, they can't use like counterspell. They have to counter the ability. Then when you're actually casting the spell, then they can use counterspell. That's very important because like otherwise basically you'd have 2 points where people can counter your spells, and that would make it pretty terrible as a mechanic. Anyway. The stack. So this is probably the most important zone in the game, although it does not have a space on the board. A lot of times people will actually put things, if there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, they'll actually put the cards in a stack. So it's like a stack of cards, which is why they call it the stack. As abilities are activated and spells are cast, they enter the stack, then are resolved in reverse order, the most recent going first. So it is something, I believe, in the 90s, back when Magic was first created, they didn't really have the stack, at least to my understanding. My recollection, I should say. Or at least I didn't use it that way. I maybe was doing it wrong. But anyway, yeah, this like... the game is almost played in like reverse order with this stack, so that's really weird. It is important to consider the stack and what you are playing in which order. So this is called sequencing, right? Sequencing is very important. A lot of times if you play spells in different orders, you can completely get a different outcome. So let's say someone uses a creature's ability and you cast an instant that's destroying that creature. That ability doesn't happen because you destroyed the creature. However, if you cast something destroying a creature and then they use the ability comes first and then destroying the creature comes after. Very few effects do not enter the stack. Turning over a face down card does avoid the stack, meaning it cannot be interacted with. So this is called Manifest. They actually have a few different versions of this, but basically the card is like a face down creature, usually a 2/2, and then yeah, 2/2 ward 2 I believe. And then at any time, including other people's turns, you can pay the casting cost of the creature and flip it over. If it's not a creature, you can't cast it, is the downside there, but there are a lot of things that let you manifest. So if you like for instance, I believe it's called Scroll of Fate. You can just tap it, and then it's an artifact you can just tap, and then you can put one of your creatures into the battlefield face down, and then wait until you need to block or something, and then you assign it as a blocker, and then you pay the casting cost and flip it over. So they're attacking into they don't know what. A lot of times that can be enough to like make people say, yeah, I don't think I'm going to attack you because I don't know what you're going to block with. It's you're going to have some shenanigans to pull on me. I don't want to do that. So yeah. Alright, so this has been our zone review. I hope it's been helpful. In the next video, we're going to talk about some interesting facts about MTG and its history. So we're going to do kind of like an information one. I think that'll be interesting. Anyway, take it easy.